Hello, everyone. My name is Dee Ryan. I'm the CEO with Limerick Chamber, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Midwest Economic Insights Report briefing. The Midwest Economic Insights Report is a key output for the policy team here at Limerick Chamber. It measures changes in key economic indicators for Limerick, Clare, and Tipperary. It's a differentiator for us, and we're proud that no other organisation is doing this Midwest-specific work. On our team today, we have Sean Golden, our Chamber Chief Economist, and Dermot O'Shea, our Policy Executive, and they're going to take you through the latest results for spring 2022. And so I will hand you over to Dermot O'Shea. If any questions or any queries come into your mind through the course of today's session, can I invite you to just pop them into the chat function here on the screen. Dermot will take us through the first half of the indicators, handing over to Sean, and we will have time at the end for any questions that you might have or any conversation that you might like. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dermot.
Thanks, Dee. Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to this spring edition of the Limerick Chamber Midwest Economic Insight. So just before we kick off, I'm just going to take you briefly through the presentation layout that we have today. So first and foremost, I'll be taking the first half, as Dee mentioned, focusing on enterprise and employment, followed by education and skills, and then finishing up with tourism and logistics. I'll then hand over to my colleague, Sean Golden, who will take care of the housing as well as the consumer and business sentiment section. So to kick off, we're firstly going to focus on the enterprise and employment section. And this first slide here highlights the employment breakdown of the Midwest sector based on the type of employment sector that is available. So right here we have the years 2020 and 2021. And what we're really highlighting here is the employment growth across a multitude of sectors for 2021, which was really a recovery year for a lot of sectors in the Midwest economy. You can see sectors such as the agricultural sector, the professional, scientific and technical activity sectors experiencing a decent level of growth throughout 2021. If you focus on the bottom of the slide here, we can see the three largest sectors in the Midwest being human health, wholesale and retail, and industry, with industry experiencing a 32.4% growth between pre-pandemic levels and 2021 Q4. It's also important to acknowledge that not all sectors have experienced the same sort of growth throughout the pandemic. And as we focus on the next slide, we'll focus on the three largest sectors with wholesale and retail, human health, and industry. We can really see over the period of pre-pandemic in 2019 Q4 to 2021 Q4, we can see they've had quite a different level of performance throughout, with industry really experiencing a decent level of growth, with that 32.4% growth really been fueled by an increase in demand and exports, while a really contrasting view with wholesale and retail, with government health restrictions really limiting face-to-face business activity, and of course a number of people within the wholesale and retail sector having to go on to government income support such as the PUP and the EWSS. In the middle then we have the human health, which has remained largely consistent throughout the previous 2 years, which isn't surprising given the high level of demand that has been put on the health sector. Moving on then, looking at the overall statistics of the Midwest region, you can see here this graph highlights the number of people in employment in the Midwest region, as well as the unemployment rate percentage. And a couple of interesting stats to note in this slide here. First and foremost, the growth between 2021 Q1 and 2021 Q4, with a further 33,200 people gaining employment throughout that period. Another interesting point to note is the unemployment rate, which stood at 4.5% in 2021 Q4, which was down on pre-pandemic levels of 4.9 in 2019 Q4. And this is an important one to watch moving forward, as in 2021 Q4, there was still a decent number of people in the Midwest region on government income supports, such as your PUP and EWSS. And as these income supports begin to phase out, it'll be interesting to note how this unemployment rate changes for the Midwest region. Another important stat to note is the size of the labour force in the Midwest region, which has grown by almost 11%, 10.8% between now and pre-pandemic levels. Then moving on to commercial vacancy, another important area for the Midwest and for the business community. What we've highlighted on this slide here is that all three Midwest counties, Limerick, Clare and Tipperary, as well as the national average for commercial vacancy rate. As you can see, all three counties within the Midwest region are above the national average, which is of course a great concern, with Limerick experiencing a 5.5% percentage increase between 2021 Q2 and 2021 Q4. And this is certainly a concerning area with a number of hotspots within the Midwest region having a high concentration of commercial vacancy. If we look at the likes of Kilrush, over a quarter of its units commercial units are vacant at 26.2%, as well as Shannon and Abbeyfield being around 24%. And then, of course, Limerick City being the economic driver of the Midwest region, having 19.4% of its commercial units vacant, is quite a concern. And then, as well as that, looking at, again, the commercial activity by share of units, we can see here in the Midwest region, almost 3/4 of the units within the Midwest region are taken up by service or wholesale and retail. And just diving into this a bit further, it's important to acknowledge that these industries and these sectors that are quite important. If we look at the service sector and how greatly affected the accommodation and food service sector has been affected, with the only region in Ireland being Dublin that did not experience a decline in the share of commercial units for the accommodation and food sector. Diving a bit deeper into that, I'll dive into that later on in the presentation when we look at the tourism area. Moving on next to education and skills, again, another important area for the Midwest region. And it's first and foremost, it's important to highlight the positive pipeline of graduates and enrollments that we have within the Midwest region. We're very lucky to have the presence of University of Limerick, Technology University of the Shannon, and Mary Immaculate College within the Midwest region. And we can see this exponentially growing level of enrollments and graduates within the Midwest region, which of course is an important asset for attracting FDI into the region. Between 2015 and 2016 to 2020 to 2021, we saw a 22.7% increase in enrollments in the Midwest region, as well as a 38.1% increase in Midwest graduates. And just looking at the outcomes then, so we have data here provided thankfully by TUS and UL on graduate outcomes for 2020, sorry. You can see that 79% of graduates in TUS in 2020 were either in employment or further education or training. And the same for UL, where it was at 75%. 65% of graduates remained in the Midwest region for TUS, while 42% remained in the Midwest region. And TUS also having a 29,000 per annum average starting salary, while UL's was around 35,000. And it's important to highlight these positive outcomes of this steady pipeline of graduates and new enrollments in the Midwest region, as it really shows to current business and potential future investment that there is a high level of graduates that do achieve employment within the Midwest region, that do remain in the Midwest region. And what's not shown on the slide here, but detailed in our report, is this exponentially growing level of salary per year, and this grows as it gets bigger and bigger, which is important in the context of competing with larger salaries in the likes of Dublin as remote and hybrid work becomes more accessible. As well as this, we wanted to highlight, as well as the higher education area around further education and upskilling and training. Limerick Chamber is fortunate enough to have SkillNet within its ranks, and what we've highlighted here is a couple of statistics from the last 2 years. Focusing on 2021, we can see there was 91 events rolling down and 133 events. Now, the reason for this drop in events is in 2020 there was excessive demand for the likes of COVID-19 related training, which of course was no longer as relevant in 2021. 618 training days for 691 participants is quite an encouraging level of participation for SkillNet. And on the right-hand side here, what we have is apprenticeship take-up for the Midwest, looking at the Limerick and Clare Education Training Board, as well as the Tipperary Education Training Board. And we can see here that there was an exponentially growing level of interest in apprenticeships prior to the pandemic. And this is certainly a useful tool moving forward that can add to the current growing level of young and skilled workforce within the Midwest region. Looking next at tourism as a section, we've highlighted a couple of areas that are detailed further in our own Midwest Economic Insight report. So first and foremost, as I touched on earlier, the accommodation and food service commercial stock. We've highlighted here the Midwest region, as well as a breakdown of Limerick, Clare and Tipperary, noting that, of course, with Clare being much more reliant in the Midwest region on tourism as a driver for economic development in this region, you can see that it's been greatly affected between 2020 and 2021, with the share of commercial stock in County Clare dropping from 20.5% to 11.1%. While Limerick and Tipperary was much more in line with the national average. Underneath this, what we have is the performance of Limerick hotels from 2017 to 2022 year to date, looking at the revenue per available room, the average annual rate, as well as the occupancy rate percentage. And while it's important to acknowledge that 2022 year to date is up on previous years, but obviously, of course, the hospitality and the hotel sector having 2 very difficult years, not being able to gauge in as much business activity as previous years. It's still a bit too early to tell how this performance in 22 will carry on with us entering the busy months of the summer now, we really won't be able to tell how the recovery and how 2022 has gone until the full year has been complete and we can compare it to previous years. Then looking at another very important area for the Midwest region, the presence of Shannon Airport. On this slide here, we highlight the level of passengers for the three largest airports in the Midwest, Dublin, Cork, and Shannon. And as we can see, Shannon has often lagged behind Cork in terms of passenger numbers, but has slowly caught up in the recovery period of 2021, which of course is encouraging. Recent stats that have just come out for 2022 Q1 have shown that Shannon is again ahead of Cork, which of course is encouraging to see. Although it is important to acknowledge that while Shannon is catching Cork, it is also an issue around the dominance of Dublin as a Dublin airport, as the passenger share has, as shown on the next slide here, where we highlight the market share of passengers for the 5 main Irish airports. And if we look to the far left here in 2005, we can see that Dublin had 73% of the market share of passengers, while Shannon Airport had a modest 13%. But if we fast forward to 2019, we can see that Dublin's market share has grown to 86%, while Shannon's has shrunk to 4%. Now, the question we have to ask really is this the norm across Europe and other northern, smaller European countries? And the blunt answer really is not. We've highlighted on the right-hand side here other smaller northern European countries and their capital airports and the market share of passengers that they have, the likes of Norway having 50%, Portugal and Switzerland 51%, and Ireland being all the way up at 86%. So this is something that is of concern for Limerick Chamber, and it's something that we will continue to lobby for moving forward, and it's something that we certainly want to address. The final section I'll take you through then is logistics. Again, the Midwest is very fortunate to have the presence of Shannon Foynes Port within its ranks. And just another key statistics which are highlighted further in our report, with Shannon Foynes being the largest dry bulk port in the country. Of course, is highlighting between 2019 and 2021. The performance of Shannon Foynes has been quite encouraging, and it's even more encouraging looking forward with the projects that they have in the pipeline, such as the road upgrades, including the Foynes to Limerick N69 upgrade, as well as the Foynes to Limerick rail line, which will improve connectivity around the Midwest region and from Limerick to Foynes. Upon the completion of these transport infrastructure projects, Shannon Foynes have stated that 75% of GDP is to be within a 2-hour trip of Foynes, which is a very encouraging thing to see, along with expansion of their current warehousing scheme, where 127,000 square foot of warehousing space is to be expected to be available around this time next year. So that's all from my side here. I'm going to pass over to my chief economist now, Sean Golan, who's going to take us through the housing section, the consumer sentiment section, as well as the business sentiment section. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Diarmuid. So Diarmuid has just went through what we would call normally the happy section of the report. It's probably going to be just slightly bleaker in terms of the housing situation across the Midwest. And there's a couple of items I'm just going to take you through in terms of indicators that will bring it down. So if we look at planning permissions over the last number of years, we can see that there is actually an increase. The Midwest is actually doing quite well in terms of planning permissions. In 2021, we managed to go up by almost 1,000 homes. So we are at about 2,800 in 2021. That's planning permissions. Something that we are seeing from them is that apartments are still lagging behind, and there's kind of been drastic increases in one-off housing out in country areas. It's important to note that when it comes to planning permission, that it's not a guarantee that these homes will be delivered. I suppose it's just indicative of what could come down the line. And the key is actually activating these planning permissions and getting them built. So if we look at commencements for 2021, we can see that only about 500 houses were commenced in Limerick and between 220 to 250 in Clare and Tipperary. So we can see from the jagged line that commencements in housing aren't really stable. And what we're commencing at the moment is really not going to get where we need to be in terms of overall housing delivery as per the ESRI. So the ESRI saying in Limerick, we need about 1,800 per annum, and that's not including pent-up demand. So each year that we miss it, that figure is going up and up and up. So if we look at actual new dwelling completions across the region, you can see in 2021, across the whole country, we delivered about 20,500. In Limerick, we did 606. In Clare, we did 410. And in Tipperary, we did 315. So it is increases on previous years, but still it's not where we need to be in terms of overall delivery. And you'll see how much of this new housing is actually allocated to owner occupiers in a slide coming after. But as I said, the ESRI housing demand for Limerick alone is between 1,200 to 1,800. So that represents a doubling and tripling of what we're delivering at the moment, just to meet yearly demand. And that's not including pent-up demand. So you can see really that we're not where we need to be in terms of new dwelling completions. The residential property price index as well outlines another grim scenario. So overall, nationally, year on year to February 22, it increased by 15.3%. In the Midwest, it increased by 14.8%. And then nationally, that's the 19th month of consecutive growth. And in the Midwest, it's the 10th month of consecutive growth. If you were to look at asking prices across DAFT with pre-pandemic, so Q4 2019 to Q4 2021, the average asking price increase was about 40K across the whole of the Midwest. So you can see that how the residential property price index and asking price increases really aren't sustainable for most people to actually buy a home. However, Limerick is doing quite well in terms of a comparable to other cities. So we're better than national, we're better than Cork, we're better than Galway, but it's still not good enough, I suppose, with the median prices. In Limerick, we're at about 215,000. In Clare, we're at about 195, and in Tip, we're at about 175. So Tipperary is actually seeing quite a drastic increase in 2021, and that was an increase of 12.9% in their median house price. So that might reflect people from Limerick or Clare moving to a more affordable county within the Midwest region. And it's something that we will have to keep an eye on going forward. Now, if you look at the difference between buying a home and facilitating the mortgage on a monthly basis versus actually renting a home, a similar home, at the national level, if you were to get a mortgage for the median house, it would cost you 66% of what it would be to rent that house per month. So you can really see that there's a massive price difference between owning a house, paying the mortgage, and renting a similar house. So in Limerick, we can see that that's about 43%. So there's quite a gap between owning a house in Limerick City and renting a house. And what that says is that there's really not enough supply of rental accommodation in the city. But it also says that owning a home is much cheaper than actually renting. Then we can go across the Midwest. Limerick County's at about 73%, Clare 71%, and Tipperary about 66%. So out of all the cities in Ireland, really, Limerick City has one of the biggest price gaps here. And if we look at overall social housing delivery, we've done well in previous years across the Midwest to decrease the share of subsidies on new homes and social housing, but it's still taken up quite a bit of social housing delivery. So if we look at the light blue line there, we can see that that's subsidy housing. So it's the rental accommodation scheme, housing assistance program, and leasing. So most new social housing that's delivered across the Midwest is really part of one of these subsidy schemes, which really don't represent value for money for the state. We spend about $1 billion a year nationally between RAS and TAP, and we're really not delivering enough direct bill through local authorities and approved housing bodies. You can see that our bill total across the Midwest is quite low. Limerick did have an increase in 2021, to be fair, but Clare had a decrease and Tipperary had a decrease as well. So it's really something that we have to get better at, because what's happening is when you have a reliance on the subsidy schemes, it's putting those on the social housing waiting list into the private sector, and they're kind of competing with private market renters. So it's not really good, and it's driving up prices in an already acute supply issue area. So direct build is really something that has to be addressed going forward. If we look at the demographics and the waiting list for social housing, there's about 2,000 people on the waiting list in Limerick, about 1,100 in Clare, and about 1,100 in Tip. And if we drill down into actual the demographics of those waiting lists, about 50% of people on those lists are under the age of 39, and about 75% and upwards are people from smaller households. So it's a one adult family or one adult and 1 to 2 children. So it really shows us what type of homes we should be building, and they should be homes for smaller household sizes. Now, if we looking on from the social housing, if we look at the new home market for 2021, we can capture what percentage of new homes are actually available to owner occupiers, to the state, or to other buyers. So this is data from the Central Statistics Office. So in 2021 for Limerick, only 30% of new homes were available to first-time buyers or to owner-occupiers. So that's about 3 in every 10 new homes. So if you build 10 new homes, 3 of those were captured by owner-occupiers. For the state, it's about 4 in 10 every new homes. And for other buyers, it would be about 3 in every 10 new homes for Limerick. So the other buyers would be, investors, any type of non-household purchasers. For Clare, the split between state and owner-occupier is pretty much even, with owner-occupiers getting about 44% and the state getting about 40%. In Tipperary, we can really see the dynamic change, with the state having about 6 in every 10 new houses in Tipperary, so about 60%, and owner-occupiers getting about 30%. So really what this tells us here is that there needs to be an increased provision of affordable housing for owner-occupiers. They really represent a small portion of the market. So overall, nationally, owner-occupiers account for only about 40% of new homes in 2021. So when you see that we've delivered, 20,500, owner-occupiers actually only get about 40% of that nationally. So it's really not good enough. There's actually a small sample of houses that owner-occupiers are eligible to go for. And this brings me on to my next point, which is Housing for All, which is essentially the government strategy and solution for tackling the housing crisis. And you can see that where the owner-occupier section kind of fits in here for affordable housing. So the state is planning to deliver about 313,000 new houses by 2030, with about 171,000 of those being private, 88,000 being social, and only 54,000 being social. So it's quite striking here, the demand that the state estimates for affordable housing, which is quite low. 54,000, social housing is almost double that. So it's something to be mindful of going forward, that this is quite a low figure in terms of the overall Housing for All plan. Now, something that we do here in Limerick Chamber is we actually track the amount of rentals that are available per month across Limerick City and suburbs. And it really brings home the issue of the housing crisis in Limerick. There was only 21 residential homes available to rent in Limerick City and suburbs in April. They were an average price of almost €1,700 per month, and there was only 5 one-beds and 8 in block apartments. So if you look at decrease in household sizes or single people, they're going to really find it tough to actually get a one-bed home in Limerick. The demand is quite high, but the supply is quite low. And then in terms of living in a more dense, compact space, as per the National Planning Framework, we only have about 8 apartments available in April as well. And all those stats in April represents a worsening of numbers from the previous month in March. So, when you see announcements on the news about new jobs in Limerick, you can call back to this and say, well, look, only 21 homes were actually available to rent in Limerick in April. And this is something that we've seen since we started doing this analysis in February, that the supply of rental homes on a monthly basis is really quite low. And then if we look at residential vacancy, so overall residential vacancy is trending downwards. Now, one of the reasons that it is trending downwards is because we keep delivering new homes. So as we deliver new homes, the share of vacant homes obviously gets smaller. So people might think that it's decreasing, but the amount is pretty much actually staying the same. It's just that we're delivering more new homes. So if you look at the amount of vacant properties that are available nationally, it's about 91,000, which is quite a lot. And in terms of derelict properties, it's another 22,000 on top of that. So if you look across the whole Midwest area, we have about 11,400 vacant and derelict properties between Limerick, Clare and Tipperary. So we've about 3,000 vacant in Limerick, another 2,500 in Clare and another 2,500 in Tipperary. And then you have the derelict homes on top of that. So what we really need to do is we need to get a national strategy and analysis in place to identify what scale of refurbishment is needed for these homes, where they're based, can we make them livable, how long it will take to make them livable. But without that, we can't really say how many of these homes that we can put into use. So that's something that we have to do before actually seeing what we can use these for. But there's a significant stock there, and that's something that policymakers have to be mindful of, that we can use this to meet a couple of years housing supply in the short to medium term if need be. Getting into a kind of more interesting section, I suppose, being a first of its kind for Limerick Chamber, is the fact that we carried out a consumer sentiment survey, which looked at about 300 people across Limerick, Clare and Tipperary to kind of get an idea of where their head is at and their spending is at for the coming months. So about 50% of people believe now is the wrong time to make major purchases. So that's new houses, new kitchens, refurbishments, cars, electronics. And over the next 12 months, the majority of people expect to improve their financial situation, and the majority of people actually expect to increase their savings rate or no change at all. I suppose what's important to note there is because of COVID and people able to work from home and less social gatherings, people have saved quite a bit. So it doesn't look like that's going to change. And if anything, it's going to change in a more savings focused direction due to uncertainty due to the cost of living. So that might hit businesses' bottom lines across the Midwest as people save more, as people become more cautious. In terms of discretionary expenditure, upwards about 60-70% of the people expect to spend less over the coming months, largely driven by uncertainty and increased cost of living. On a more important note, I suppose we can see that the amount of people that were working, about 54% of people got a wage increase in their current role over the last 12 months, and about 16% of people got a wage increase by switching roles. It's still important to note that about 30% of people didn't get any increase at all, and there was a significant amount of people that got increases but didn't keep in line with inflation. So I suppose it's important to note that their real income did actually fall because inflation is so high at the moment. Something that we also captured from our consumer sentiment survey is kind of how the hybrid and remote working model has changed Limerick in terms of being a more international or nationally focused region. So about 58.7% of respondents worked in Limerick, 10% worked in Dublin, 9% worked in Germany, and about 8% in the United States, with the rest kind of spread throughout Ireland and a small fraction in Britain. So this is going to cause probably a risk for local employers. Now that people can work from home, probably command higher wages from other locations, it's probably going to put upward pressure on wages in local staff. And that's something that businesses have to be mindful of. And then when we get on to the business sentiment survey, we can largely see that businesses are actually quite positive. They're expecting to expand over the coming months. 87.5% of businesses expect to recruit staff within the next 6 months. 70% of businesses have actually recruited staff since the start of the year. And only about 7.5% of business have decreased their workforce since the start of the year. Overall, in terms of business health, 90% of the businesses that were surveyed aren't on any COVID supports anymore. And 68% of businesses have turnover close to or exceeding what their projections were in January 22. Now, something that's it's a key marker here for businesses and insurance premiums, and we can see that quite a lot of businesses have had drastic increases in their insurance premiums, with the majority falling into the 11% and the 20% market. So that's going to cause key pressure, as well as the overall inflationary environment on businesses. And in terms of demand, we can see that most businesses are either in line with pre-pandemic or above pre-pandemic. So it's at about 70% mark. So they're doing quite well there. And about 60% of businesses would describe their situation as good, with another 30% being satisfactory. And over the next 6 months, about 55% of businesses expect their financial situation to be better. So to be fair, businesses are quite optimistic. Consumers are a bit more pragmatic. They feel they'll be better off, but they're going to save more, and they're feeling quite uncertain. So it'll be interesting to see how those two match up in the coming months. And we asked the consumers and businesses one common question to see where they fall within this. And the top two answers are actually the same across the board. So we asked, what would you consider the top issue facing the Irish economy over the next 12 months? And businesses and consumers said increase in the cost of living. And they also said supply and affordability of housing. So there are two key issues that are common across the board. The conflict in Ukraine is also common. Interestingly enough, consumers are far more cautious of COVID than businesses are. So that's an interesting change there. I think Brexit-related issues have really fallen off the radar, be it because of the Ukrainian conflict or because of COVID, but they're really one of the lowest on this data set. Another thing to be mindful of is that businesses and consumers are highly aware of impending interest rate hikes and how that might feed into monthly payments or access to credit in the future. So thanks. We'd just like to throw it open to the floor. If there's any Q&A, myself and Diarmuid would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. We'll give people a couple of minutes to see if any questions come through this afternoon. I know there was an awful lot of information there for people to digest, and as I mentioned in the chat box, we will be issuing you with a full copy of this report so that you can go through it at your leisure in the coming days, along with the recording of today's session. And the full report will also be available on our website for members to dig into and to use. We hope that it'll be of use to you within your own business in helping support decisions that you might be making. Sean, before I'm just giving people another few minutes, can I ask, were there any particular responses or results coming out of the business sentiment survey that surprised you? Was there anything you hadn't expected coming through there?
I was surprised they were so positive. To be honest with you, it was good to see they plan on investing over the coming year. They plan on hiring more staff. They are cautious of the issues that are out there, but overall they're hugely positive. I mean, when you look at businesses, they're after coming off a couple of years of Brexit, then the pandemic, and now the Ukrainian crisis. And to be actually positive after all that and still have faith in the political and economic system is actually a credit to where Ireland is in terms of, you know, a place to do business. So that was surprising to me, especially when consumers were a bit more pragmatic and they were a bit more reserved and were kind of tending to hold on to their money a bit more. So that was something that surprised me. It was good to see. And we had another question that's in our final report that didn't make it into the slides, but 70+% of businesses feel confident or very confident in the government and in the economy. So that's good to see as well, that there isn't that kind of division that there would be in other places.
Yeah, great to see that kind of optimism from the business leaders in Limerick, Clare and Tipperary. And just to remind everyone that survey was taken just last week. So it's a real snapshot of the current sentiment, with all of those other factors you mentioned, Sean, obviously at play, but businesses recognizing that they have there's a good pipeline of work coming down the line for them this year. And I think certainly we're feeling it, and we're seeing it in our interactions with people, that people are eager to get out and get selling and eager to meet each other and to do business.
Yeah, absolutely, Dee. We did give businesses space at the end to kind of input areas that they might be worried about or areas that they wanted to highlight. You know, and they were broadly kind of positive for the most part. I think there were some issues around, you know, maybe the O'Connell Street works and security in around the city centre. And some kind of Brexit related issues that were unique to certain businesses, but overall it was broadly positive. Absolutely,
and the indicators that you took us through and Diarmuid took us through earlier on also largely positive, with the exception of the huge challenge nationally and locally to provide affordable housing for workers and colleagues in employment in the region, and to ensure that they can get on with their lives and have that precious work-life balance that we can offer here in the Midwest. Query coming in here from Donal. Sean, in your opinion, what will be the biggest economic challenge in 2022, and what can be done to combat that?
To be honest, this is probably going to be no surprise to anybody that knows me, but it's housing. It genuinely couldn't be anything else. Like, climate change obviously is an issue. It's been there for quite some time. The conflict in Ukraine and the rest of it, and then the COVID hangover. But I mean, when you look at the housing data, like, we are not at the races at all. We need to be delivering double, triple what we're doing at the moment, and it needs to be affordable. So it's not the case that if we just deliver supply, it'll suddenly become affordable all of a sudden. That's not the case. It has to be embedded affordability. There has to be permanent affordability in it. We have to provide housing across a broad range of typologies, for families, for single people, for smaller household, age-friendly housing. I think what some people miss a lot of the times when they're looking at housing is that there's a lot of people from, I suppose, the millennial bracket that aren't going to be able to ever own their own home. And what's going to happen is when those people get older, they're going to be relying on the private sector for housing. Their pensions are not going to be able to afford private sector housing. So we're going to get to the issue where if the state don't start delivering age-friendly housing now, you could get a bunch of 65-plus-year-olds that are actually almost homeless when they get to retirement, and that would be around my age bracket. So for me, it's housing. It's one of the basic human rights that people need. And I think that other areas might become more attractive for people if the housing situation doesn't get sorted, because it's such a key factor in people's lives.
Thanks, Sean. That is indeed a real concern. Another question coming through here in the chat. Either one of you, Sean or Dermot, when you think of sustainable growth in the Midwest region, what would you think are the key things that we should be advocating for and looking for?
I think, you could probably split sustainability into two parts. You have the climate sustainability part, you've the economic sustainability part. I think in terms of economic stability, you really have to have a diverse range of sectors. You can't rely on just one sector or one big company, because we get to the stage then that there's over-reliance in that company or that sector. And if there is an external shock, then we're highly exposed to it. So a diverse kind of local economy with lots of different types of businesses that can, take lots of different types of employees in some is critical. In terms of the whole, climate sustainability, like we're really well placed here in the Midwest to take advantage of offshore floating wind generation. And it's something that a lot of people down here are advocating for, including ourselves in the chamber, and also Shannon Fine's Port. But when you look at the strategy for wind generation out to 2030, it's really focused on the eastern seaboard. It's not floating energy, I don't think. And there's really no plan past 2030. So that's something that we should really be capitalizing on as well, because something that we see from speaking to our members is that there's a high energy demand. So, I mean, if you want that economic sustainability piece, you have to have the climate sustainability piece where they can have reliable green energy to feed into. So one of the things we need to do with that is upgrade our infrastructure here in the Midwest to take account of future offshore wind generation plans. And it's something that the government needs to do better. So like as a broad answer, I think, diversity of businesses and harnessing that Atlantic wind.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Sean. Absolutely. Maintaining and supporting our established and existing businesses, but very much looking to the future for the green opportunities for industry in the region to develop in a climatically sustainable, as well as from a longevity and economically sustainable way. And that's very much our focus in Limerick Chamber. Another question just coming through here for us, asking how important is this kind of research and work for us in Limerick Chamber? And I would say, it really is something that the board of Limerick Chamber, our elected board members who are elected from within our membership every year, they're uniquely focused on. We do strongly believe that it is our role as the voice of the business community to invest in this kind of work. And that's why you see, we've two highly educated, motivated and intelligent team members on the call today who have spent weeks and months in putting together this latest economic insight report. And we will continue to do that, because if we're not doing it, nobody else is. And the independence of Limerick Chamber and not being connected to any other national organisation for our funding is a critical component of allowing us to call out a warts and all look at what's going on.
I think as well, Dee, I think like even before I got here to the Chamber to start 2022, it's a very evidence-based organisation. So I think items like this are really important to inform how we approach things, be it budget submissions or submissions to the LS Mats or whatever else. We really have a data book to build off of. And I think you hit on another key point as well, is that it is an independent piece of research. There's no agenda behind it. It's to outline the good and the bad, and areas that we need to improve. Obviously, if I was to write, a next one towards the end of the year, I would love it all to be good. But I think at the same time, the independence of Limerick Chamber to be able to call out what we're doing well, which is employment. The employment landscape is really good at the moment, but also what we're not doing great in, and that's housing. Even though it's a national issue, we're all here for the Midwest. We all want to see it improve. So I think the independence part, but it also informs our evidence base for going out and reaching out to businesses, but also lobbying politicians as well.
Absolutely. And if to that end, really would encourage people on the call today to please take some time over the next few days to flick through the economic insights, and in the opportunities that you have in your businesses or in your personal life to meet and talk to elected representatives, please highlight what occurs to you as are the key issues and pieces that we need to put a focus on in order to ensure that Limerick is achieving its potential and the Midwest is achieving its potential to be the best place for our families to live and grow. Okay, on that note, folks, I'm going to thank you for joining the call today, and thanks to my colleagues, Chamber Chief Economist Sean Golden and Policy Executive Diarmuid O'Shea, for all of their hard work in putting together not just today's presentation, but the work that's gone into the report, which I'm sure people will find very informative. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.